Are the Baltimore Ravens overhyped, underrated, or respected just the right amount? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day. Free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And we have a ton of Ravens content coming your way 5 days a week on Locked On Ravens. Of course, we do this every single weekday, year-round. So regular season, playoffs, Super Bowl, off-season, free agency draft, we have it covered Monday through Friday. So Ravens news, analysis, updates, we're here for you. If you're an everyday or you listen every day, thank you so much for being here with us again and making us your first listen. If you're new to the channel, welcome in and making us your first listen. And if you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well for your support. And we have a lot to dive into today here as we're getting closer. Rookies reported to training camp yesterday. We got a couple of little hype videos from the Ravens social media team with the rookies walking in. Zay Flowers, Tavius Robinson being featured on those. But I want to talk a bit today about if the Ravens are overhyped, underrated, or if they're respected just the right amount. So, 3 different points there makes for 3 segments. So in the first time, we'll talk about if Baltimore's overhyped. Then we'll take a look at the other aspects of that, if they're underrated. And then maybe if they need more respect or if they're respected just the right amount. So let's get into it here. And the reason that I decided to talk about this is because Bleacher Report put out an article, it was a couple days ago at this point, of these contenders or supposed contenders and whether they were overhyped or underrated. And for the Ravens, they said that they were overhyped. And I kind of looked at this and I thought, what's the argument for them being overhyped? Personally, I don't think they're overhyped. So I think this is a team that is really good. They have a lot of potential. What the argument from Bleacher Report, and I guess from others, based off of what I've seen, people who aren't as high on the Ravens as some, is the fact that Lamar hasn't stayed healthy the past 2 seasons. Going from Greg Roman to Todd Monk is going to take an adjustment period. Although, look, that's a win, right? going from Greg Roman to Todd Monk, for those who know the Ravens and watch the Ravens, that is a win. But other things include, the secondary, the cornerback room in particular. It's Marlon Humphrey, Rack Yassin, and then who else is there? Pass rushers. They lose Justin Houston. Calais Campbell no longer there. Even a Jason Pierre-Paul, they've lost about 18 sacks. What's the wide receiver situation going to look like? I think when people say the Ravens are overhyped, I think it has a lot to do with Odell Beckham. Honestly, I think it does. I think that people either are really high on Odell or they think that the Ravens signed this washed up wide receiver who's been injured and hasn't been the same since his New York days. I think there are two very different trains of thought for him, because I think there's not a lot of people who just think, oh, well, Odell's going to be fine. He's not going to be really great, but he's not going to be terrible. Somewhere in the middle, I think people are either on one side or the other of that. And so when talking about Odell's health, talking about Rashad Bateman's health, that to me is where I think people say, oh, well, people are just overhyping this team. But I think the Ravens in, we can even talk about national media circles, based off what's going on ESPN and, Bleacher Report and NFL Network, CBS, all those. It feels like the Ravens right now are getting respect, but I don't think it's over the top. Oh, well, they're going to beat Kansas City 100%. There's no way that Kansas City beats them. No way Cincinnati beats them. I think people are giving Baltimore a chance, as I think they should, because Baltimore is good. And I think they're going to be good this year. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden, oh, they're so overhyped because they're being talked about in contender status. Let's not forget that while the Ravens haven't had the playoff success that I think a lot of people, myself included, would have hoped, for those covering, for those watching, and of course the Ravens fans out there, they are a team that's been one of the more consistent franchises in the league ever since coming into the NFL in 1996. And while 1996 was a very long time ago, it's not like Baltimore has had many losing or 500 seasons. Now, they've come close these past couple of seasons. Of course, Baltimore in 2021 and 2022 But the thing is, the Ravens have gone through so many injuries. And so when people are saying, why is everybody predicting the Ravens to be in the upper echelon of the AFC when they finished 10-7 last year? They didn't make the playoffs in 2021. Where is it? Well, Lamar Jackson has missed the back half of the last 2 seasons. They had brutal injury luck in 2021. So when people say, why are people hyping up this team when they haven't done anything the past 2 seasons? Part of that is, well, they have been injured, and not everything is to blame on injuries, right? I'm not saying, oh, they've been injured, you can give everybody a pass. They obviously did not give their coordinators a pass. I don't think they should have. But the fact that Baltimore is not getting put in that, oh yeah, they're clear I think if the Ravens were clear Super Bowl favorites right now at this point in the offseason, sure, I think I could say, hold on now, pump the brakes a little, slow down. We're not quite there yet. But I think there is excitement, there is optimism, and I think that's okay. I still think this is Cincinnati's division until Baltimore takes it back from them. But there's a difference between essentially what would be, in my opinion, disrespecting Cincinnati by saying they're a terrible team and they're not going to win the division at all this year. It's the Ravens division. And saying, yeah, the Ravens have a definite chance to dethrone Cincinnati because of the fact that, hey, look, the Ravens in the 2 games that they actually played against Cincinnati when they gave it their all, the game towards the end of the season last year, obviously they rested some of their guys there. But week 5, the Ravens beat Cincinnati, made Joe Burrow look mortal. The wild card game, the Ravens were, I will scream this one from the mountaintops, the Ravens were a Tyler Huntley fumble away from winning that game. They were. I think the Ravens win that game if Tyler Huntley scores in that QB sneak. Unfortunately, it went the other way. But the Ravens have a chance, but that doesn't mean they're overhyped. I do not think Baltimore is an overhyped team, but I will say I think there's a little more excitement in national media circles surrounding Baltimore this year because I think that people understand that the Ravens have made these changes on offense and they are committing to Lamar Jackson and having it be his offense. And excitement and overhypeness, I doubt that's a word, but being overhyped, I'll call it. We'll settle at that. Being overhyped and being excited, they're 2 different things. And the optimism surrounding just what's a good fit, because the other thing about, why are you hyping up the Ravens is because the past 2 years, well, multiple years, it goes beyond that, but the Greg Roman offense just was not working. It was not growing. Now the Ravens have an opportunity to kick it into another gear. And while, again, that doesn't mean they're Super Bowl favorites and they win the Super Bowl no matter what, it gives the Ravens a sense of, hey, we're in that, upper echelon of teams. They have depth in a lot of places, not everywhere. The roster is not perfect. But to me, I say, look, Kansas City is in that, I put Kansas City, they're the champs. They're in the top tier. But then that tier 2, I'd say it's Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Baltimore. No particular order there, just listing off the way they came in my mind. But I think it's that tier 2. In the tier 3, then it's like the Dolphins and maybe the Jets are in that. I maybe want to see Aaron Rodgers play before I put him there. But you can make your argument the Jets are in there. Maybe it seemed like the Chargers, the Jaguars, I would say. So I think that it is fair to say that there is a lot. And a lot of this has to do with, look, the Ravens were covered essentially all during the early part of the offseason because of the Lamar Jackson situation. I think a lot of people got very familiar with Baltimore's roster. And also, I think, honestly, adding Odell gave, just like Lamar is this huge personality, not just a great football player, but a huge personality. Odell brings them a national, a worldwide personality. So I think there's a lot more attention on the Ravens this year. And I think some people will maybe misidentify that as overhypedness. That's not a word again, but like being overhyped. But I think that the Ravens, they're not overhyped. I think people are hyping them up, in a way that is more so, oh, look, this team can be really good. They can do this. They can do that. Not they will. Once you start getting to the they will statements, that's almost like the Cleveland Browns Super Bowl champion stuff, paper champs. That stuff is overhyped. But I think for Baltimore, they're not getting overhyped. But let's talk about if they're underrated. We'll talk about that coming up in the second part of the show, because for the overhypedness, there is the underratedness. So we should have stayed tuned, plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll win $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from money line to over under to who you think's going to be the first home run hitter for the Orioles. You could bet Gunnar Henderson. You could bet Adley Rutschman. They're in the middle of a tough series with the Los Angeles Dodgers right now, but you can bet on that series all and have the safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, whenever you win, you can get paid instantly. There's another place to bet all the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here, our second part of Locked On Ravens on Wednesday, a midweek edition. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Talking Ravens, talking overhyped, underrated, or are they just right? Where are the Ravens being talked about right now? We talked about the overhyped part of this in the first part of the show. Let's talk about underratedness, though. It's interesting because I think, again, with the excitement surrounding Baltimore right now, I think in previous years, yes, Baltimore is being underrated. But I think that the way that they're being talked about right now, people do, I think, respect, at least in the national media circles, people do respect the Ravens, but there is still some people, I'm not saying everybody respects them, there are still some people that I think are sleeping on them a little bit here. But I think the underratedness has been a little bit like, do I feel like Baltimore's underrated? I feel like they were more underrated a couple of seasons ago. I feel like this offseason we've seen, people go in and saying the Ravens can't dethrone the Bengals. They're the team that can threaten the Chiefs out of everybody in the AFC. And, how much of that is just media heads talking and making headlines, I don't know. But I think for a lot of people, what I kind of talked about in the first segment, they see what's going on with the offense. They see the new wide receiver group. They see the defense and how they performed towards the end of last season. And they're starting to understand that, oh, hey, look, they have Lamar coming back, and it's a health thing. And I think part of this is, yes, the Ravens have not had great records the past 2 seasons. They've not had great end to the seasons the last 2 years, but a lot of that does have to do with the injury situation. So Baltimore being underrated, I don't see it as much in this year, this offseason, as I do recent seasons. And that's just because I think you look at the offense on paper, I mean, just looking at the starters, and I think the actual term starter has kind of lost its value and lost its meaning except for obviously quarterback's important, a couple other positions, but for like running back and wide receiver and all that, guys are going to play snaps. Like Zay Flowers, if the Ravens start 2 wide receivers on game day, and that's their starting lineup, he won't be a starter, but he'll still get a ton of snaps. Regardless, though, the starters, Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, will go 3 wide with Odell Beckham Jr., Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers. Mark Andrews, Ronnie Stanley, whoever the left guard's going to be, Tyler Linderbaum, Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses. People look at that on paper and say, hey, that's pretty good over there. And then they see the offense and what Todd Monken can do. People look at the coaching changes throughout the league. They see, I think the flashy hire was Eric Bieniemy to Washington. And look, I'm a big Eric Bieniemy guy. I think that he's somebody from a football perspective, very smart football mind, and I'm very happy he now has the opportunity to go and flourish in Washington and hopefully lead that team to a lot better than it has been over there. But Todd Monken, I think, was the right fit for the Ravens because of timeline, because of his ability to adapt to skill sets and stuff we've talked about here. If you're an everydayer, we've talked about this so much on this show about how excited I am for Todd Monken. I'm sure those listening today, watching today, are very excited for Todd Monken as well. But we talk about the additions, right? Like with Odell and with Rock Ya-Sin and Zay Flowers and those guys. But the addition by subtraction, I think, was Greg Roman. And we saw on national talking shows and obviously our show, other local Ravens shows, one of the key, just main points of contention with what was holding this team back was Greg Roman. And I think to some people, the way I'm trying to put it is some people don't value coaching the way that I think it should be valued. I think some people just think, oh, it's the players on the field, and that's what is the biggest factor, and coaching only plays a minimal role. Not now. It's a minority. That aspect of, I think, a minority of people think about it that way. I think more the majority is that coaching is really important. But when we're talking about being underrated, the people in that group that feel like coaching is not as important will say, okay, cool, they got rid of a coach and hired another one. What's the big deal? The offense is, going to change a little bit, but is that really going to have an impact? The answer is yes. just by the way, the offense is going to look totally different for the Ravens this year. And so when people are trying to put a gauge on like, oh, what's the offense going to look like? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be worse? Well, I think, it's like 99% safe to say that it's probably going to be better than last season, but you just don't really know until they get out on the field, whether, preseason will give us a little glimpse, but teams don't give away stuff in the preseason. The offensive play calls there, it's very vanilla. You don't want to give away all your secrets. You don't want to open that vault, as Greg Roman called it. Don't want to open that vault until, the games actually matter. The preseason games don't matter. Now, the Ravens have that preseason winning streak, so that'll be something to monitor to see if that comes to an end finally this year. I know a lot of people, even Ravens fans, are just saying, oh man, just get it over with, please, just lose a preseason game. But it's kind of cool to have that streak. But regardless, that's only on the offensive side of the ball, right? When talking about defense, the way that the defense evolved, and I think, Mike Macdonald was a college coordinator for a year, was with the Ravens for a while, went to Michigan, had a great year there, came back to the Ravens, and now is a defensive coordinator. Had to kind of, the bearings had to be set for him. He had to adapt to being a play caller at the NFL level. He did that. And by the end of the season, the defense was incredible. Roquan Smith comes in. And so people are talking about the Ravens defense. Well, they lost Calais Campbell. They lost Chuck Clark. Who were the people look at the Ravens roster, I would say, they have the stars, Roquan Smith, as I just said, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Williams, etc. But then they look down the depth chart after a couple of guys and they say, who is this Jalen Armour Davis guy? Who's this Pepe Williams, Brandon Stevens? Who Adafe Owe is your number one guy? Who is Broderick Washington, Justin Matabike, Travis Jones? Who are these players? Right, we're kind of in that where Baltimore's depth, it's not as many household names anymore, where they're not signing these, 10-year veterans that people know. Like, it's not, Chris Harris Jr., he was really good for Denver like 10 years ago. No, he was no disrespect to Chris Harris Jr., he was a lot better, and he was better less than 10 years ago. He was good less than 10 years ago. But again, that's the point where Chris Harris Jr. is a household name, right? I know who Chris Harris Jr. is. I'm sure many people listening know who Chris Harris Jr. is. It's not that. It's not like the Ravens are bringing Darrelle Revis out of retirement and saying, hey, look, it's not like it's not even like they're bringing back, like, in terms of household name, Marcus Peters is a much bigger household name than Rock Ya-Sin is, right? Rock Ya-Sin is this, he's okay. People who aren't familiar with Rock Ya-Sin is saying, he's okay, but I don't really know that guy. For Marcus Peters, was with the Rams and the Chiefs and obviously Baltimore, and like that guy's former first rounder from Washington. That guy's good, but in reality, Rock Ya-Sin fits the Ravens better, so it's more unknown on the defensive side of the ball. So I wouldn't say Baltimore is necessarily super, super underrated, at least not compared to what we've seen over the past few seasons, but I think you could make a case that some people still are sleeping on them because of multiple different factors here. And you know what? I think Baltimore honestly thrives off of that. We know the Ravens are a team that, even back before Lamar, because I think Lamar firmly put them in the spotlight after his breakout in 2019. But the Ravens were a team that thrived off of, kind of flying under the radar, being underrated, and then coming out and just absolutely surprising teams and winning football games, stealing their opponent's souls. So it's nothing the Ravens are necessarily new to. They've had that before, but in terms of respect, the Ravens, sometimes they feel disrespected and they can put that out on the field. So coming up, we'll talk about if the Ravens are respected just the right amount, if they need more respect. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. We're back here rounding out Locked On Ravens here on a Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. And if you're listening here today, thank you so much for your support. We're chugging along towards the regular season. I always plug it here, but we will do live shows. We've done them before, obviously, after big moves. We actually did our first postcast, which is right after the game episode, after the Ravens playoff loss. So it was not a great way to kind of ring in the whole post-game live shows, but we're going to be doing lives after the preseason games, breaking down everything, and then obviously have shows after that in the morning. We'll be doing live games after regular season games, playoff games, hopefully Super Bowl as well. Also, any big moves that the Ravens make throughout the course of the rest of this offseason, maybe trade deadline, we'll have live shows for that. So it's really fun. It's really cool to interact with the chat a little bit more in there with the live chat. So be sure to subscribe to notifications on so you know when we go live and also when we post new episodes. But I'll tell you right here, Monday through Friday, right around 6 a.m. Eastern time or so. Same show, both audio and video form. So if you're an audio listener, you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. Live shows also go up in audio form. But with that plug out of the way, let's talk respect for the Ravens. We know Lamar Jackson is one of the most disrespected players in the NFL and has been ever since coming into the league. And the way that I describe Lamar Jackson and just kind of the narratives, the hate that he sometimes gets, is Lamar Jackson had preset narratives, even dating back to college when he was coming out into the NFL. And those preset narratives, he has won. Look, we all can admit that Lamar Jackson had room to grow, much like every prospect does come out of college. It's not just a Lamar Jackson thing. Every prospect has room to improve. Lamar Jackson was very raw. He had the talent, but he was raw as a passer. He had to improve there. And just there were a couple other areas where you're thinking, all right, if he can improve on this and improve on that, he has the potential to be one heck of an NFL quarterback. And he's done most of that. Now, still room to improve, much like every NFL player. But those preset narratives from college, from, the combine and the draft in his first season, people have kind of stuck with those, where those are, one, outdated, and two, some of them were just never even true to begin with, and they were ridiculous to begin with, like he can't throw. That's something that still is pretty ridiculous. So we know that Lamar Jackson is a disrespected player, and it's unfortunate because I don't think he deserves it. But the team right now, we've talked about overhyped, we've talked about underrated. I do think Baltimore right now is respected just right. I do. Now, there are some people who I think are saying, oh, well, Baltimore's so overhyped, and there are some people who are underrating them for sure. But at this point, I think that the way that the Ravens are being talked about right now, I think it's fair. As I talked about in that first part of the show, released earlier in the show, I think that Kansas City's in the tier of their own in the AFC. And then it's Baltimore, Buffalo, Cincinnati. Those are my 3 tier 2 teams. I call it the big 4 in the AFC: Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, Cincinnati. Those are my top 4 in the AFC. And I think Kansas City's 1, and then you can kind of sort out 2, 3, and 4 how you want to. But at this point, Baltimore has a lot going for them. And I think that this is a year that's so important for them because, look, let's face it, Lamar Jackson's not getting any younger. I think the Ravens maybe wasted a year or 2 of him by keeping Greg Roman. I will say they probably wasted a year of him. I think that keeping him in 2020, keeping Greg Roman there was fine, I guess. Keeping him in 2021 was fine, I guess. But 2022 was the one where, probably should have gone. But at this point, you have to maximize Lamar Jackson's window. And I think Lamar Jackson still has a pretty long career ahead of him. He's, 26 now, so it's not like he's 22 anymore. He's not as young as that, but I think he still has the ability to play into his 30s, absolutely, for sure. And I know all this stuff about, oh, well, all right, what about the play style? He's gonna get worn down. Again, it's just preset narratives. And sure, the more you get hit, the more, your shelf life is. Any player, not just quarterback, but any player goes down. We've talked about running backs and their shelf lives over the course of the last couple of days, couple of weeks here on Locked On Ravens. So for Lamar, it's, if he gets hit so much as he's running, his shelf life. But at this point, he's been very good at protecting his body ever since his rookie season. His rookie season, he was a little reckless, but I think now he's a lot better at that, and the rushing attempts probably go down. And I think people are just respecting what Todd Monken, the vision of Todd Monken right now is. And also, I think people are also respecting that, with Lamar Jackson, with J.K. Dobbins, with the way the Ravens have built the offense around Lamar and the way the defense showed that they can definitely step up in big situations last season. I think people are respecting them. Now, I think the national media coverage is a little bit, honestly, more positive surrounding Baltimore this year. Whenever Baltimore's talked about, now let's throw away the Lamar Jackson coverage from the contract saga, which we will not speak of because I know that was a little scarring for some people. I talked about Lamar's contract for probably like 3 months straight once we hit the end of the season. But that was like, what's going on? What's going on with Lamar? Is Lamar going to get traded? Is this the day? Is this the day? But now that Lamar is signed, people are excited for the potential of Lamar just not in a Greg Roman offense, right? It's essentially as simple as that, where now you're still going to have a dominant run game, presumably, but with more of a passing aspect to it, which I personally just think is so huge for the team to be able to make sure that they're switching it up enough to not have defenses say, oh, yeah, we know what they're doing here. We know what we're doing there. Lamar Jackson talked about that a couple of seasons ago. And you never want to hear that a defense can guess your plays. So the AFC is loaded. We know the AFC is loaded this year. There's no secret about that. But to me, I think that the Ravens, in recent years, probably they have been a bit underrated, as I talked about in the second part of the show. But I'm okay with how they're being talked about right now. Now, some, like, for example, we talked about how Marlon Humphrey was the 20th rated cornerback a couple months ago, and that's a little ridiculous. Some of the PFF stuff and a couple other articles here and there. There is some disrespect here and there. I think there is for every team, but for the Ravens, it's just kind of like, where is this coming from? Patrick Queen stuff and whatnot. But I think the Baltimore has set themselves up very well for a very good year this year. Again, I say about 13 and a half playoff teams, depending on what happens with the Raiders. That number went up with the DeAndre Hopkins signing, but you have the depth of wide receiver. Now, that's the thing. It's depth, but people don't know about the depth. People don't know, who is Devin Duvernay outside of a special teams guy? Nelson Aguilar is washed up. Rashad Bateman has barely played in games, right? That's where all this hate, these narratives are coming from, because people just don't know like the name brand value. And there are some people like that where people value name over actual production. And maybe a guy who, like, if Ardarius Washington goes out there and balls out, it's going to be, oh, well, who's that guy? Like, what's that guy's name? But look, everybody starts off that way unless you're a super hyped up college prospect and, you already have the reputation coming in. You got to build up reputation for yourself. The Ravens are great at finding undrafted gems. They have a couple of those in Dante Demas and Keaton Mitchell, in my opinion, this year. And hopefully, with Steve Saunders now out of the building, F- as Scott Gismao calls him, you have the ability to, I think, be a healthier team this year. And that's what it is. Health is so important in winning a Super Bowl. It is incredibly important, because the way that we see in any sport, it's not just football. Every time a player gets injured, no matter how important they are, or if they're just a depth guy, if they're, the top guy on your team, or for the NFL, 53rd guy on your roster, the floor goes down and the ceiling goes down with every single guy that gets hurt. And the Ravens have seen that firsthand, where their top guys gotten injured these past 2 seasons, and things have just plummeted. Now, last season, things weren't going, great outside of the first 3 weeks. It was kind of, on again, off again type deal. But Baltimore now, again, a great opportunity for them to make some noise. I think they're definitely Super Bowl contenders, and people, I think, are talking about them as contenders this season and not saying, oh, well, they're going to be divisional round exits, Now, for the most part, right, there are still the people who think they're underrated, still the people who say they're overhyped. But to me, I think Baltimore is being talked about. I'm okay with it. I'll say it's just right, teetering on the edge of underrated a little bit, but I will say that I'm all right with it at this point. But that's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form. It's the same show, both in audio and video. It is free too. No money involved here on Locked On Ravens. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.